Hello, welcome to the Tomosi Business Training Series. Thank you for joining us once again. Have you subscribed to our social media handles? Remember, this podcast is aired on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Enjoy!
I would like at this stage to take a detour before we go to our final level, the matter or the nature and type of competition we have on the domestic market and on the international market. This will be our last one. What type and nature of competition, how intense it is against our products, especially in the external markets. So I'd like to take a detour before we go to our seventh level by asking young people, especially those who have followed us all through these years, especially since we started online teaching series around 2017 and early 2018. Why do we do this? Why start a business in these circumstances that I've described in all these 6 levels of competitiveness for farms and our country? Well, there are two things that I know from experience that produce interesting results. One is called business, another one is called marriage. Unfortunately, I am in both of them. And so my 20 years in marriage and my 23 years in business gives me a little bit of confidence to speak about these two things. These two things both require courage in making decisions, you young people. They require patience. Fortunately, that's my wife's name. They require persistence. They require walking in the shoes of the other party. And they both tend to have positive results if one is lucky, and I think I should use the word blessed. If one is blessed and works hard on those two things. Blessings find us working hard on something. These two things in our country, those who do them work at them very well. They tend to challenge the central dogma that the best jobs are in government or being in politics as young people, or that the couple next door has the best marriage. These are the two dogmas. The grass is green on the fence, or that being in government is the best one can do. The people who work hard at business and marriage challenge that central dogma. So there is work that has to be done at a personal level and family level to check that these dogmas I mentioned, the grass is greener on the external part of the fence, or that having a government job, working hard at getting a government job or being in politics is a solution. These are, I call them central overriding dogmas that I hear with young people all the time. Let me explain why we need to challenge these dogmas. This week, I found an interesting example of what it means to challenge the central dogma at a particular time. This example is from 3 brave scientists who through generations defied peer pressure, peer pressure, from their professional colleagues to not toe the line simply to be accepted. These people, 3 gentlemen, one was called Ludwig Gross, another one was called Howard Teman, and another one is called Robert Gallo. I think this one is still alive in his mid-80s. These 3 were fascinated by a strange class of cancer-causing viruses, the sarcoma viruses, that appeared to them initially in cattle, in pigs, in mice, in chicken, in cats, so generally in animals. But somehow the scientists at the time, the peer reviewers for this group that were questioning others, remember scientists also have a social club, they have peer reviews that put you in a place that you don't want to be in or challenge your position unless you join them. So the people reviewing the information coming from these 3 people that I mentioned would not consider the possibility that this class of viruses that are found in bovine and other animals would be transmitted into humans, because they assumed, the science of the day, that cancer cells don't get transmitted by air or something outside of the host. Cancer has to be a cell going wrong, but it cannot be transmitted. Now, the cancer research at the time was not considered at that time of these, 3 gentlemen I'm describing. At the time, cancer research was not considered important. It's around 50s and to 1970s. The natural order of a flu virus, for example, as known at the time, was that it sits in a cell and it multiplies itself and, until the immune system of the host expels it. A flu virus, that's what it does. But these sarcoma viruses that the scientists, these three were investigating, had a strange mutation. Sometimes they would take on the shape of the cell that they have infected, and they would insert their genetic code into that cell. So what was the central dogma that these three people faced in their time as scientists? The central dogma had to do with DNA. That the DNA, you know the DNA, please don't take this too much science, just follow me to understand the basics. That the DNA, which is the basic structure of your cell, akatofali koina mutwe gwoba in your body, that DNA gave instructions to the RNA. The RNA acts as the messenger to carry these instructions, and the instructions control the work of the protein in the cell. This was the central dogma that these three scientists were facing. That the DNA gives instructions in the cell through a messenger called RNA, and RNA transmits those instructions to protein in the cell. But what did these three and a few other scientists with them find through their research for many years of rejection? Remember rejection? Remember, there is always a price for not agreeing with the central thinking of the day, whether you are in business or politics or science. What did these people discover in their research? The rejected group that refused the orthodoxy, following everyone, they discovered that there is a class of viruses that use instead the RNA, which is supposed to be the messenger, in a reverse order. And instead they act as the very sender of instructions, not the DNA, as had been discovered and generally agreed by the scientific community at the time. Now, by 1970, these brave few scientists discovered that there was a small enzyme that sits in the RNA, remember the messenger, that acts as an interpreter of information coming from the DNA in this sarcoma class of viruses, and that the RNA of the cell infected, remember, the RNA, which is supposed to be a messenger, is now infected, that it acts in reverse on account of this virus. To those of you who are like me, who are non-scientists, social scientists, this looks like a lot of detail that doesn't make sense. But people struggle for 50 years to explain why something is acting in reverse. And they act alone because nobody understands what they are talking about, because they're challenging the central dogma. Now, these three scientists, they termed this enzyme reverse transcriptase. Don't worry about the names. It comes from reverse transcription of instructions. They call this class of viruses retroviruses. By September of 1980, this is now 10 years later, one of these scientists called Robert Gallo and his colleague, they focused on a part of a human cell called the T cell, and they discovered something called human lymphotropic virus 1, or HLTV1, from the class of those retroviruses. Slow, methodical, non-yielding, doing the right thing against peer pressure. How was this LTV1 spread? Through sexual contact, through mother to child, and from the blood of an infected person. Guess what? At the time they were finding this HLTV1, the scientific community rejected their paper to be reviewed because they said it's impossible for RNA to reverse instructions of the DNA. But as coincidence happens, at the time there was a strange immunodeficiency disease that was rummaging through towns and countryside, and it was associated with homosexuals and the gay community, especially in the US. By 1983, these very few scientists had isolated and developed a way to grow the T cells in a lab, and they also grew this virus too, this HLTV1. They grew it in the lab. And the similarities between what they had discovered and the scientific community was denying, HLTV1, the similarity with HIV/AIDS virus was so emphatically visible to all the deniers. Had it not been the world of over 50 years of work, of rejecting the orthodoxy and working against the central dogma, against all sorts of ridicule, against arrogance of the status quo, these scientists, because you see the status quo people in science also aim at fame and research grants, it would have taken longer to discover the HIV virus and how to treat it and save humanity had it not been for the persistence in challenging the central dogma by those three people. See, young people, when we simply follow dogma, we very much miss our purposes in life and we do not help others. Thank you and have a great weekend.
Would like to hear from you. Please email us at info@tapmedia.com and visit our website at www.tapmedia.com. You can also visit our offices located at Tomosi Business Park, Luzira, Port Bell Road, or call 0414 220 702. Thank you.